What I would like to talk about today is about different mechanisms that may lead to different types of wounds. And I want to illustrate that the process of a pressure ulcer development is not a single process that has only one pathway, but there are very diverse pathways that can lead to ulcers. Let me start with the definition of a pressure ulcer that was published last year in the new prevention and treatment guidelines. And it says that a pressure ulcer is a localized injury to the skin and or underlying tissues, usually over a bony prominence, resulting from sustained pressure, including pressure associated with shear. And I will focus today on what I mean with sustained pressure and with shear. Let me first start with a typical example. Everyone knows that deep-sea divers, when they dive in the sea, they experience very high pressures, and that leads to all kinds of problems, but not to a pressure ulcer. For example, if a deep-sea diver goes down 10 meters below sea level, that means that the pressure that is acting upon that deep-sea diver is an extra water pressure of 76 centimeters mercury, and in the pressure ulcer area, 76 centimeters of mercury is huge. Yet they don't develop a pressure ulcer, and the reason for that is that this pressure is completely uniform on that body of that deep-sea diver, and that means in practice that the deep-sea diver, the volume of that deep-sea diver will change a little bit, but the shape of the deep-sea diver will not change. And what is important is shape change of tissue, deformation of tissue. And you get that once you have a non-uniform pressure over a body with pressure peaks, then the material will deform like you see on this image, and that in itself will be in the end a cause of pressure ulcers. Earlier today, I already spoke in my plenary lecture about two different mechanisms that may lead to tissue damage. One mechanism is ischemic damage, and you have that when once the deformation is such that blood vessels are occluded over an ischemic threshold, then you have a shortage of oxygen in the tissue, nutrient supply is blocked, you get an accumulation of waste products, and in the end you will have tissue damage. But this is a process that takes several hours. So after 2 to 3 hours, the first signs of damage will occur in the tissue. However, if you go to a higher load, and that's the kind of load that you all sitting here experience sitting on these hard chairs, if you go over that threshold, then there is an immediate structural damage in your tissue, which we call direct deformation damage. We don't know exactly where it comes from. It can be that either the cell membrane it doesn't function anymore, but it can also be a direct damage to the cytoskeleton of the cells. What we do know is that this process starts already in a few minutes. So the first signs of damage, so the first cells that start to die, can already take place in 10 minutes. If you want to have a shape change, a deformation, you need a pressure gradient. And the higher the pressure gradient, the higher the deformation will be. And this deformation eventually will lead to cell death and problems. Earlier this afternoon, in my plenary lecture, I gave you the two mechanisms that we know now play an important role in pressure ulcer development. On the one hand, if we have a fairly low deformation, we can have a situation of ischemia, which is a process that gradually will lead to cell death and takes a period of hours. If we have a high deformation, the deformation that you feel in your buttocks now on these chairs, you have another process that's going on, which is called, which we call direct deformation damage, and that is a process that starts already in minutes. And that's probably one of the reasons why within a few minutes sitting on a chair, you start to feel uncomfortable and reposition yourself. These high strains are physiological. I'm referring to this chair already, but I'm also, in this case, always referring to the work that Amit Geffen did a number of years ago, where he placed people in an open MRI and showed that high strains do occur in your muscles during sitting. And these strains, if you look at this color graph, the pink area is the area close to the bony prominence, and he calculated strains of up to, I think it was 60% or more, which is definitely in this high risk zone. So my take-home message for basically the lecture that I gave earlier this afternoon and for now is that high internal strain should and can be avoided with proper cushioning, and that's, I think, what we talk about today. But still, even in that situation, you do need repositioning to avoid ischemic damage. That's the bottom line of my talk earlier today. But there's another point or another issue that I want to raise, and that is the shear. It's also important to avoid high shear forces at the skin surface, and let me first explain what I mean with that. Suppose I had a person sitting in a bed like this, in an almost upright position. And if you want to know what forces act on this person by the bed on the skin, what you could do in your mind, take away the bed and replace the bed by forces. And these forces are, you could represent them by an arrow which has a direction, a certain direction, and also a certain magnitude. You can decompose such a force in a force which is normal to the skin, and if you divide that force by a pressure, by an area, you have a pressure. So we call that a normal force divided by area. And you have forces that are parallel to the skin, and these forces parallel to the skin we call shear forces. And these shear forces are dangerous, and that was already pointed out in 1958 by ROHO, and later by Dinsdale it was explored. And you might wonder why are these shear forces now so dangerous? Why are they more dangerous than only normal forces acting on the skin? The question is that now because the mechanical load is higher? Is that the case, or is there a different issue? I think it's probably not only the fact that the total load is higher, but I think there are different mechanisms going on if you apply shear to the skin, which are important for tissue damage. And I come with a few hypotheses. I have no proof for it, but I hypothesize here. I have 4 hypotheses why shear forces may be extra dangerous. And the first one was already pointed out by Reichel himself in '58, and you can see it if you shear your own skin. In front of the place where you shear, you see wrinkles in the skin. And these wrinkles lead to very high deformations in the skin, and these high deformations can cause problems. That's the one. The second one has to do with the way the skin is built up. The skin is a layered structure, which can very well be seen in this very beautiful histological image from Hagisawa. Here you can see that the skin consists of several layers. You can see it very clearly, the stratum corneum, the epidermis, the papillary layer, the dermal layer. And what happens if you shear that skin, so you can represent it with such a schematic like I show here. If you shear that skin, all these interfaces between these different layers are loaded in a direction where they are most vulnerable. They are not so vulnerable if you apply a pressure. They are more vulnerable if you apply shear. And that can lead to delamination. So you can tear these layers from each other. So delamination, I think, is also a problem if you shear tissue. We've done some studies very recently where we did shear skin, fixated it in the sheared position, and then how to say that, conserved it and did histology on it. And I'm afraid you can't see it in the back, but in this slide you can see white spots everywhere, and that's spots where the skin is delaminating. And one of our students looked at the amount of area that was damaged as a function of shear strain. And you can see here that already at strains close to 10–15%, you see an enormous increase in damage in the skin. A third hypothesis is tissue anisotropy, and that anisotropy means that the properties of skin in different directions can be different. And I can illustrate that with this schematic. If you think that pink area, this is skin, and you load it with a compressive load, then it's very difficult to deform it. It is very stiff in a compressive direction. But if you shear it, and a metaphor is this feather that I place here. If you shear it, it's very easy to deform it. So it's much easier to deform skin during shearing than during compression. The last one has to do with the way that the blood vessels are organized in the skin. The main blood vessels are in the deeper layers, and they have a kind of sphincters that go to the surface layer, and that schematically shown like here. And it is very easy if you shear it to block such a bended tube that is going upwards. It's like you are giving water to your flowers, and if you want to stop that water, you just bend your tube and then it blocks. And so it is easier to block those blood vessels during shear than during compression. That's the fourth hypothesis. So I have four hypotheses why I think shear can be important for tissue damage. This is my last slide. So my take-home message is that in general, mechanical load, pressure and shear will lead to a very heterogeneous strain field in the tissues, and this strain field you have to know, and for this you need modeling, and Amit will talk about that later on. The highest strains are often found near bony prominences, so that may explain that often wounds start in deeper layers and grow outside to the surface. But it is also so that shear forces near the surface have a specific way of damaging the tissues. And I have four hypotheses for that. That is the wrinkling, that is the delamination, that is the anisotropy of the skin. It's easier to deform it in shear, and it's easy to block blood vessels. And maybe there are even more. And I think that these high shear forces have a major effect on the tissue layers near the surface. And I would like to acknowledge all the people who've worked with me on this area and my sponsors. Thank you for your attention.